Adrian Newey's revolutionary Aston Martin concept lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days. That is how long it took for Honda to abandon the original engine setup and move into emergency adaptation mode. We are talking about a reported 4-second per lap deficit, up to 160 horsepower disappearing halfway down the straight, a hybrid system that overheats under full braking load, and a team that had to cut open its own bodywork just to keep the car alive. This was supposed to be Formula One's next super project, the most successful designer in modern history, a full factory Honda partnership, a brand new regulation era. Instead, preseason testing ended with overheating, limp mode activations, battery shortages, and an engine adaptation that directly compromises Newey's extreme, size zero philosophy. And here is the shocking part. Honda's emergency fix does not unlock performance. It reduces it. Safer battery maps, lower peak deployment, more cooling, more drag. In other words, the AMR26 may already be running below its intended performance window before race 1. By the end of this video, you will understand why this adaptation puts Newey under serious pressure, why the partnership is already showing cracks, and why Aston Martin's championship ambitions could be collapsing before the season even begins. If you want the full story behind the headlines, subscribe now. Because what happened after preseason testing changes everything. The dream was simple. Build the most aggressive aerodynamic car on the grid. Pair it with a compact, powerful Honda engine. Start the new regulation era ahead of everyone else. But the first cracks appeared long before Bahrain. They began in Barcelona. Officially, it was just a filming day. Unofficially, it was the first warning sign. The AMR26 arrived late. Assembly complications slowed preparation. The rear packaging was so tight that mechanics reportedly struggled just to install auxiliary components around the Honda power unit. That is how extreme Newey's size zero concept was. Everything compressed. Everything optimized. Every millimeter designed to reduce drag and increase airflow efficiency. On paper, it was a masterpiece. On track, it could barely complete short runs. Even in cool February air, temperatures spiked after only a few consecutive laps. Honda initially believed it was a minor calibration issue, a sensor anomaly inside the battery system. Nothing dramatic. But the data kept showing the same pattern. Under braking, when the hybrid system attempted to harvest energy, battery temperatures climbed aggressively. The control software intervened. Protection mode activated. Recharge stopped. At the time, the team controlled the narrative. Limited mileage meant limited exposure. But Bahrain changed everything. Desert heat. Longer runs. Real stress testing. Day 1 began cautiously. Lance Stroll completed a controlled program. Within a short window, the engine entered limp mode. Power delivery inconsistent. Deployment fading earlier than expected. This was not a qualifying simulation. It was basic data collection. Then Fernando Alonso stepped into the car. And on his third lap, the system shut down completely. Electrical failure. Garage time increased. Track time disappeared. And here is where the numbers became impossible to ignore. When the battery drained, straight line speed collapsed. Reports indicated a deficit of roughly 4 seconds per lap compared to competitive benchmarks. 4 seconds. That is not marginal. That is catastrophic. The reason was brutally simple. The hybrid system was not recharging properly. When drivers braked hard, the energy store overheated. Software derating kicked in to prevent thermal runaway. Once derated, the system could not harvest efficiently. Without harvest, there was no sustained deployment. The car would launch normally out of corners. For the first section of the straight, it looked competitive. Then halfway down, electric boost vanished. Clipping. Severe clipping. Up to 160 horsepower missing once the battery drained. And this is where the situation turned from technical issue to strategic crisis. Because Honda's response was not to push harder. It was to pull back. Engine maps were made more conservative. Deployment curves softened. Thermal margins widened. They began preparing a safer battery specification. Greater heat tolerance. Lower peak output. Which means less performance. Not more. And here is the uncomfortable truth for Newey. His entire aerodynamic concept depends on maximizing efficiency around a powerful, compact unit. If the engine now requires larger cooling volumes and conservative energy deployment, the AMR26 cannot operate in its original window. And that forces a choice. Keep the body tight and risk overheating. Or open it up and sacrifice aerodynamic performance. In Bahrain, the team already showed signs of compromise. Emergency cooling cuts were made in the bodywork. Visible openings. Temporary solutions. The car looked slower. Because it was slower. The airflow to the diffuser was disrupted. Drag increased. Rear stability reduced. The very identity of the car began to shift. By the final day of testing, Honda reportedly did not have sufficient spare battery units at the circuit. Running was limited. Programs shortened. Confidence shaken. Fernando Alonso reportedly admitted he had never driven with less power in his career. That statement carries weight. He has seen difficult projects before. He recognizes warning signs. And internally, tension is rising. Newey, designed around performance targets Honda, was expected to meet. Honda now suggests the packaging is part of the problem. That the engine works correctly if given more space to breathe. Two engineering philosophies. One car. And right now, they are colliding. Preseason testing is over. The adaptation phase has begun. But this is not the adaptation Newey wanted. This is survival mode. And the most critical question now is simple. Can Aston Martin recover the original vision of the AMR26? Or has the emergency response already reshaped the project into something far more limited than anyone expected? And this is where the real pressure begins. Because adapting under calm conditions is one thing. Adapting under public scrutiny, with a new regulation era about to begin, is something very different. Honda is now working around the clock. Revised battery cells. More heat-resistant materials. More conservative harvesting maps. Software adjustments designed to prevent thermal spikes during heavy braking. But every layer of protection comes with a cost. Less aggressive recharge means less aggressive deployment. Less deployment means reduced straight-line advantage. And that changes race strategy completely. If the AMR26 cannot rely on consistent electrical boost, overtaking becomes harder. Defending becomes harder. Even qualifying becomes compromised. Because in modern Formula One, energy deployment is not just about peak speed. It defines lap structure, braking balance, corner exit behavior, driver confidence. Now imagine being Adrian Newey. You built an ultra-efficient aerodynamic platform assuming a specific energy curve. You optimized airflow around compact radiators. You minimized bodywork volume to reduce drag. And suddenly, the engine supplier is asking for more space, more cooling, more breathing room. That is not a small tweak. That is a philosophical shift. If Aston Martin widens the engine cover before race 1, they sacrifice aerodynamic efficiency. If they do not, they risk thermal shutdowns. Either decision carries consequences. And this is why the situation feels so serious. Because the problem is not isolated. It is interconnected. Cooling affects packaging. Packaging affects airflow. Airflow affects downforce. Downforce affects tire behavior. Tire behavior affects race pace. One weakness multiplies across the entire car. And then there is the political dimension. Lawrence Stroll did not recruit Newey to compromise. He built facilities. He invested heavily. He positioned Aston Martin as the next powerhouse. This project was meant to challenge the established giants. Instead, before a single race has begun, the narrative is about overheating, battery shortages, and emergency adaptations. That is not the message sponsors want. It is not the message rivals fear. And inside the garage, it creates tension. Because when engineers disagree about root causes, collaboration becomes fragile. Honda suggests the chassis packaging restricts airflow. Newey's camp believes the power unit should function within the declared constraints. Both arguments have technical merit. But only one car exists. And right now, it is not competitive. The most worrying element is correlation. Honda admitted their simulations did not fully match real-world behavior. If lab data and track data diverge, development becomes reactive. Instead of predicting problems, you chase them. Instead of refining performance, you stabilize instability. That costs time. And time at the beginning of a regulation cycle is everything. Meanwhile, rival teams leave preseason with clean long-run data. Clear upgrade paths. Confidence in their packages. Aston Martin leaves with questions. Can the battery survive full race distance? Can the car maintain consistent deployment over long stints? Can the aerodynamic concept function if cooling requirements expand? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all. Did the team push the concept too far, too early? Because innovation in Formula One walks a fine line. Push hard enough, and you dominate. Push too far, and the system collapses under its own ambition. Right now, the AMR26 feels like it is balancing on that line. The first Grand Prix will not just reveal pace. It will reveal stability. If the car finishes cleanly, confidence returns. If deployment fades again under race conditions, doubts grow louder. And if emergency adaptations continue, the original vision of the project may never fully return. Preseason testing is finished. The adaptation phase has begun. But this is not controlled evolution. This is forced adjustment. And the real danger for Newey is not criticism. It is compromise. Because once a revolutionary concept is reshaped by emergency fixes, it rarely becomes revolutionary again. It becomes manageable, predictable, safer. And in Formula One, safe rarely wins championships. But here is the part nobody inside Aston Martin can ignore. Once a concept begins to bend under pressure, the entire development roadmap shifts. Because this is not just about surviving the opening race. It is about protecting the identity of the AMR26. Adrian Newey does not design conservative cars. He designs machines that operate on the edge of possibility. Tight packaging. Extreme airflow management. Every surface working in harmony with projected power output. If that projected power output changes, even slightly, the balance collapses. And right now, it has changed significantly. Honda's safer battery adaptation means reduced peak deployment. Reduced peak deployment means the car cannot rely on electric boost to compensate for aerodynamic drag. Which means aerodynamic drag suddenly matters more than ever. So if Aston Martin widens the bodywork to improve cooling, drag increases. If drag increases while electric deployment decreases, straight-line performance drops even further. This is the vicious cycle. And there is another layer. Energy recovery is not only about acceleration. It influences braking stability. If harvesting is inconsistent because software keeps intervening to protect the battery, the rear axle behavior changes corner after corner. Drivers feel that immediately. Confidence erodes. And when drivers lose confidence, they stop pushing the limit. That costs tenths, sometimes seconds. Fernando Alonso understands this dynamic better than almost anyone. He has lived through a previous Honda partnership that promised innovation and delivered instability. He knows that early warning signs often define entire seasons. And what he felt in Bahrain was not a small inconvenience. It was a structural lack of power. Reportedly describing the car as the least powerful he has driven in his career. That statement alone should worry Aston Martin. Because Alonso does not exaggerate technical weakness. Now imagine the opening Grand Prix. High track temperatures. Full fuel loads. Long braking zones. If the battery overheats under sustained stress, deployment fades mid-race. If deployment fades, the car becomes vulnerable. If it becomes vulnerable, strategy collapses. And if the car retires due to thermal shutdown, the narrative becomes brutal. New era. New partnership. Immediate failure. That is not the story this team wants told. But here is the deeper danger. When a power unit and chassis philosophy are misaligned, fixing one often weakens the other. If Honda increases cooling requirements permanently, Newey must redesign airflow structures. Redesigning airflow structures means new simulations. New wind tunnel correlation. New balance targets. That takes months. And while Aston Martin reconfigures, rival teams refine. The start of a regulation cycle is about momentum. Whoever understands their car first builds compound advantage. Confidence fuels development speed. Right now, Aston Martin is not building momentum. They are containing risk. And there is also the human factor. When tension rises between an engine supplier and a chassis department, communication becomes guarded. Every data discrepancy becomes sensitive. Every meeting carries pressure. Trust, once shaken, takes time to rebuild. And without trust, integration slows. The AMR26 was meant to represent harmony. Newey's aerodynamic genius. Honda's hybrid expertise. Alonso's experience. Instead, after preseason testing, the project feels fragmented. The engine demands more cooling. The chassis demands compactness. The drivers demand power. And time demands solutions. But solutions at this stage rarely restore the original dream. They stabilize the crisis. They buy time. They prevent embarrassment. They do not create dominance. And that is why this situation feels so serious for Newey. Not because his design failed outright, but because it may be forced into compromise before it ever had the chance to prove itself. Preseason testing is finished. The adaptation phase is underway. Honda is working around the clock. Aston Martin is evaluating bodywork revisions. The first race is approaching fast. And the AMR26 stands at a crossroads. Either the emergency changes stabilize the platform quickly and allow development to resume aggressively, or the early compromises redefine the entire project. Because in Formula One, the first impression of a new era often becomes its foundation. And foundations, once altered under pressure, rarely return to their original shape.